Hi, everybody. Welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Today on the show, could a leading voice in the MAHA movement become the next Surgeon General? How Dr. Casey Means defended her controversial medical views in today's Senate nomination hearing. Up first, though, if you were watching the clock, President Trump spoke for a record 1 hour and 47 minutes for the longest State of the Union address in history on Tuesday night, where he claimed he had ushered in a golden age of America, saying the nation is, quote, back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before. That was the president's take. But according to a wide range of polls, voters have lost trust in his handling of the economy for the first time in his political career. So did the president provide some economic hope in his address? And how could that ripple impact the upcoming midterm races? Joining me now to talk about this is NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Hey, Brian.
Hey.
So the president laid out some of his economic proposals last night, right? Knowing that was priority number one for Americans heading into the midterms, including matching retirement contributions and quote unquote Trump accounts for children. Take us through some of these proposals from last night.
Yeah, well, the Trump accounts for children was something that had been announced prior to the State of the Union, but I think the news was this retirement account. And the details are still very thin on this. We did know going into the State of the Union he was going to have these kind of new flashy policy proposals that I would argue was the biggest one. But the idea is that for people that don't have access to a 401k, because for most people, having that retirement account is contingent on you being employed by a company that can do a match for your 401k.
And just, FYI, according to a 2025 Gallup poll, 40% of Americans, almost half of Americans, do not have retirement savings.
So it's a big deal. And the president is proposing that for that 40% of people, he would create some sort of federal program where for contributions that you make to your retirement account, the government would match up to $1,000 to seed that account. So that is something that is obviously really great when you consider how the stock market has been going up during the course of his first year in this second term, up over 10%.
And can I just stop you for a second? You would set it up through which banking facility?
This is where the details are very thin. Now, if it does kind of match the infrastructure that was laid out by these child accounts, the president would likely work with the private sector to create some sort of match, but there would need to be some sort of federal contribution as well. Right. That's the reason why this is the president saying he wants to do something, but he needs Congress to approve this as well.
For those that don't know, though, can you lay out for us these Trump accounts for kids?
Yeah, so the Trump accounts for kids, the idea is that for kids that were born during the Trump years of this administration, they would be able to open up an account and there would be money that would be seeded into that account. And then the government would match that in addition to a lot of these private donors putting money in there as well. And so the idea is that these kids, once they get older, would then be able to tap that account when they're adults to get that money. And that money would be invested in the stock market so that whatever appreciation we've seen in stock prices, they would benefit from that as well. And so I think the idea, if we could just kind of zoom out here, the idea of wanting to get more people invested and have these savings that are actually locked up for a good amount of time is a noble one. I mean, there is a real savings crisis in the United States. There were some stats, I think, that a good share of Americans do not have enough savings in their retirement to even cover a $1,000 expense. And I think that this is a serious issue, especially in an aging economy. I think that if the issue is affordability today, this is money that's locked up for decades in some cases.
So let's get into that a little bit, because the two programs that we just talked about are tied to the stock market, right? And the stock market has been doing pretty well.
Record numbers.
And the president talked about that last night. And this is a president that likes to tout the stock market. But when you are a regular old American who is worried about paying for groceries and putting food on the table, did the president address the concerns of affordability appropriately last night?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the fixation on the retirement accounts and the fixation on, the child savings accounts, those are not going to be things that will address affordability today. What we are talking about in this economic moment, especially with regards to a midterm that's going to be coming up in less than 9 months, is prices at the grocery store. Being able to buy a home, being able to afford car insurance. And the president did seem to acknowledge some of that. I think there was even a moment during the State of the Union where he seemed to acknowledge, I understand that being able to pay for things right now is a pain point for many Americans' wallets. He was pinning it on the Democratic administration prior to him and the Biden administration. But the policy proposals that I think got the most attention last night, the splashier ones like these retirement accounts, they're not things that address affordability today. I think when you talk about tariffs, that's kind of when that type of conversation becomes a little bit more relevant.
He did talk about addressing electoral costs by charging AI companies for their data centers. And
that is something that, electricity costs and utilities, we all see it on our bills on a monthly basis. It's astronomical for a lot of Americans. The president trying to address that, to your point, by proposing some sort of federal cap, I guess, if you will, on electricity costs and making the companies that are standing up these massive data centers around the country foot the bill for any increase in these utility costs. That could get, around the issue of affordability, but there's so many questions about how that would be done. I imagine that's also a thing that needs congressional support. It also feels
far-reaching to a certain extent. So as we look ahead towards the midterms, right, the purpose of the State of the Union is to, lay out what your plan is for the year. If you are a Republican lawmaker and you're listening to the president last night, right, what do you have to hold on to and run with when it comes to campaigning on the economy and the plans of the Trump administration? And what are you hearing from lawmakers in general with regards to their reaction and the president's plan?
The Republicans are also trying to get around a messaging issue. And, the president has suggested this in many forums in the past, where he is looking at the stock market, which is hitting all-time highs. That is a fact. And he's looking at the inflation numbers, which are good, but people still don't feel that. And we've been talking about this on this podcast so many times because people's understanding of the economy does not come from the consumer price index that we're reading. It comes from what they see on the receipt when they're checking out at the grocery store. You ask about the midterms, you ask about the Republicans. A lot of this is going to be about messaging. People who go to the store, they say, I am paying more than I did a year or 2 or 3 ago. I am going to blame that on the current administration. That has happened under Democratic administrations. That has happened under Republican administrations. So how do you get around that? Through messaging, by constantly pointing to how good the stock market is doing, by putting out, in some cases, these dubious numbers that seem to show that inflation is lower than it actually is. But either way, it's all about messaging. And I think the Republicans are going to try to lean into that to try to get, look, the affordability crisis is something that even the Republicans are now acknowledging is part of the electoral challenge for November this year. Can they get around that once we get to that point in time? That's the big question.
Brian Chung, thank you.
Absolutely.
The wellness influencer, Casey Means, President Trump's pick for Surgeon General, testified to the Senate in a long-awaited nomination hearing this morning. For America's top doctor, Means is an unusual choice. She is a doctor, but she didn't actually complete her medical residency, nor does she hold an active medical license. And that wasn't all senators raised concerns about. Our health reporter, Arya Bendix, was watching. Hi, Arya.
Hi there.
Introduce us to Dr. Means. Who is she?
She is a Stanford medicine graduate who, instead of going on to complete her surgical residency, actually dropped out and got into the wellness space. She's probably most well known for her presence on Instagram, promoting a lot of dietary supplements and products, and also for her company Levels, which charges people to help them monitor their glucose via an app and a wearable monitor. So she's really taken off in that space.
As an influencer, is it fair to say that she has been a major architect of the Make America Healthy Again movement?
As an influencer and just as a close ally of Kennedy, her brother, Callie Means, is also a special advisor to HHS, works closely with Secretary Kennedy. He's been actively involved in the MAHA movement. So together, there's sort of this power duo that has really helped Kennedy rise to power and influence into his current role.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the controversies surrounding her, and that is some of the stances she has on certain topics that certainly align with the HHS Secretary, RFK Jr., one of them being vaccines. The medical community has voiced concerns about her views on hormonal birth control along with vaccines. What are some of the beliefs that she has in those particular areas? And what did senators press her on today?
Yeah. So we have seen in comments, particularly on her online newsletter, concerns about the totality of the childhood vaccine schedule having negative health effects for vulnerable children. We've also seen comments about birth control pills having horrifying side effects. Those comments are at a minimum misleading, but also need a lot more context. And she tried to clarify some of them at the hearing today when she was pressed, particularly by Democratic senators. She said the side effects from birth control she was talking about for vulnerable populations like people who smoked or were obese or had a risk of clotting. But
those are already things that are identified within the medical community. That's nothing new.
Correct. And so it's a strange emphasis, and we see this a lot. She made a point to say that she does not subscribe to anti-vaccine rhetoric, but a classic playbook of anti-vaccine activists is to say, they're looking for more data or to really highlight harms that are a minimal risk in the totality of the risk-benefit portfolio of a vaccine or a medication.
What has she said in the past about vaccines?
She has expressed concern about the hepatitis B vaccine in particular being given to all newborns. We actually saw that recommendation walked back under Secretary Kennedy. And she says that, frankly, it shouldn't be given to people at birth if the parent has tested negative for hepatitis B. So that was a concern that came up at the hearing. She also shied away from saying at the hearing today that vaccines are not linked to autism. She said that we should leave no stone unturned in uncovering that question. That's something we've heard very often from Secretary Kennedy himself.
Which we know, based on scientific research, that in fact vaccines are not linked to autism.
Decades of scientific evidence. Yeah. And I think that was a particular concern for actually Bill Cassidy at the hearing because he is a liver doctor and has really emphasized the importance of stressing vaccine safety. This is a long time vaccine given to children at birth with very minimal health concerns there.
How did she address the fact that her medical license has lapsed? I mean, she is a doctor. She went to med school, as you said, but she's not licensed to practice.
Right. So she underscored that she is not seeing patients right now, but of course she's not seeing patients because you couldn't if you had an inactive license.
Yeah.
She's also said that the role of Surgeon General is not to see patients, and so she didn't see the need to reinstate her license or make it active, which I find interesting because for the past century, we've seen Surgeon Generals have that active medical license and complete their residencies. So she seemed to say it wouldn't impede her ability to hold the job, but I think many senators felt differently.
So if Means is confirmed, and she is expected to be, she's going to become part of an administration that is fully in the swing of the MAHA movement. In RFK Jr.'s first year in office as HHS secretary, he fired top health officials. He slashed funding for critical research in areas like mRNA shots, overhauled the childhood vaccine schedule. Several states are now suing over that, by the way. And he has downplayed the role of vaccination at the same time as we've seen an unprecedented measles outbreak. Are we healthier and are we safer today under this administration and the MAHA movement?
The broad answer is no, and that's not my opinion. That's the general medical consensus because of the policies you just listed. The most acute example, of course, is the measles outbreak, where RFK actually went into the epicenter in West Texas and promoted unproven treatments. Those type of policies can actually cost lives, and I suspect that we've seen many lives lost from parents who, frankly, are not vaccinating their children because they're subscribing to RFK's policies. On the other hand, we do have a chronic disease epidemic in our country. Kennedy is not wrong about that. We're seeing rising rates of diabetes and obesity and autism. But the issues that Kennedy has pinpointed as the root causes are not the ones that scientists say we should actually be looking at. And so that's the major concern there. The other thing RFK has been commended for is his focus on ultra-processed foods. Of course, those are not good for us, and they do contribute to diabetes and obesity. But we have to understand also that access to food and income is a problem here as well, not just personal responsibility.
You mentioned that she would potentially be just a continuation of the MAHA movement and what they have instituted so far in their first year. There are limits, though, to the job of the Surgeon General. They're essentially, it seems, kind of the mouthpiece, the PR for health policy, right? But they're not actually instituting health policy across the country. What do you think her influence can be?
It's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of distrust in federal health officials right now. So it will depend on whether she holds authority in that role and whether the public is able to trust what she says. I think there will be a faction of the American public that really does look to her for guidance and advice. She will make health advisories, warnings, recommendations for the entire country. And some people will believe that. On the other hand, I think there are many people in the public who follow the guidance of traditional medical professionals who will sort of ignore her guidance or look to organizations like the American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics instead.
Aria Bendix, thank you.
Thanks so much.
That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yazan Dasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard or you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.